Hey, White Sox fans, what's happening? My name is Brett Ballantini. I am hosting Sox Populi Mothership Podcast 187. And we are here to celebrate, three of my very closest friends in the whole wide world are here to celebrate the first place White Sox. Now you might say, Brett, the White Sox are 2-4. They've lost 2 series out of 2 so far this season. And you know, you wouldn't be wrong. But still, in a AL Central that seems, at least in the very early going, incredibly small sample size, to perhaps be reverting to what the AL Central's always been. Now, of course, we know that's not going to happen, right? The Tigers are going to pull away, or the Twins are going to be good. Some teams got to be good, right? Some teams got to win the division. But I don't know. Maybe this is finally the year that a 79-win team wins the division. I don't know. We'll talk about that stuff as we talk in this podcast. Somewhere in between just celebrating when the streamers fall back to the ground about the first place White Sox, we will, I don't know, we'll talk about the rest of the AL Central or something, along with my really good friends, Super Joseph Resis, back on the podcast for real, Brian O'Neill, back on a Mothership podcast. Forget this pregame, postgame stuff. Brian, you're legit now.
You back on the ship?
And a man who is keeping the faith, who pointed out, scolded and reprimanded opening day that this is a first place team, and guess what? They're still a first place team. And Malachi Hayes back in the fold. Appreciate having you around. We are going to refer, I think, to a really smart piece on Southside Sox that Malachi had in terms of predictions. I don't know. He may want to disavow it if none of this stuff ends up turning out smart, but I think there's some insights there that stand a real good reason of have a good chance of coming to pass. So we'll get into that perhaps a little bit as well. I don't know. Before we get into first week impressions, let's catch up on stuff. Yes, White Sox have lost 2 series, and yet they're in first place. They've been in first place in this horrible division all but 1 day this season. Last year, they were in first place, 0 days. So, I mean, come on. They're ahead of last year's pace big time. Of course, the pace they're playing at, along with the rest of the division, what did I calculated earlier among our group? I don't know, 108 losses, 54 win pace. Sort of sounds about right, but we'll see who pulls away from the pack. For all we know, with this vaunted pitching staff the White Sox have, a starting staff at least, they could be the team pulling away. The hitting's been maybe not great, but it's not the way it was last year. The discrepancy, again, very, very early going. And the starting staff, at least up until tonight's game, as we record on Wednesday night with Sean Burke giving up quite a few runs, was sort of perfect, like record breaking or tying or whatever that was all about. So I guess let's all chat a little bit about first week impressions of this team. Anything surprising, anything disappointing, beyond the first place, which, is just awesome, of course. But yeah, impressions now that we're, 6 games in.
It's been a weird start. Like, there's been a lot of kind of, I almost want to say, like, oh, Hannah's joining us. Awesome.
Yes, breaking news. Hannah Filippo also joining here right now. Hannah, we are just going around first week impressions. So Brian has drawn the short stick, and he is going to talk about how happy he is with his 2-4 first place White Sox.
First place White Sox. I think the most interesting thing, obviously, the thing to talk about is the starting pitching with, not letting up an earned run until yesterday. And there's a little bit of like ex post facto celebration about that. Like, I didn't really start to think about it until the 3rd day. And then the 4th day, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then it fell apart as quickly as it started. So I don't know. I didn't go into the season. We've had a lot of talk about this. There's no one who said something like, man, it'd be cool if our starters could go 5 straight games with having 5 innings of, not letting up a run. Didn't come up a lot.
At any point in the season. Forget starting the season.
I wasn't like, talk to my brothers, like, it'd be amazing. I bet this is going to happen. But while it was going on, there was a brief moment of like, oh, this is cool. And, I'm not trying to be the, eternal optimist here or anything like that. I'm not trying to make it projected going forward. But that was one more cool thing than I expected from the first week of the season. Like something to at least kind of talk about. And I was genuinely disappointed yesterday when they pulled Smith and then, they gave up all those runs. Who knows if he stayed in, if they, he would have finished off the inning. I wanted him to stay in, but it was like, all right, I have a little bit of rooting interest in the first week of the season. And I didn't expect that at all.
Forget talking among your brothers, Brian, forget like, oh, wow, do you think they could have this 5? could we name the 5 starters 5 games in a row going into the season? And, that would have been enough of a challenge. Forget what the performance would be. So, this is a pinch yourself starting rotation, I guess, up until game 6. Okay, other first week impressions of the 2-4 first place White Sox.
I'm pretty surprised to see Andrew Benintendi come out of the gate so hot. I was happy to see his second half rebound last year, but the hand injury in spring, it was a hand injury that made him take a year and a half to start hitting with the White Sox. So I was pretty upset when he broke his hand. I thought that was really going to set him back, and it hasn't. He's swinging the bat well, and maybe a few months from now we'll be talking about actually offloading that contract. I might have said the same thing about Gavin Sheets last year, though, so,
Well, you're just a year off. All you needed to do was go to another league on another team.
Seriously. Could have seen that one coming.
Sox. Yeah, we love you. We love you. Well, speaking as the person, I believe I don't know, did I pick Vaughn? I don't know. Somebody picked Benintendi as the worst player this year. So, that's one we're going to want to bury. At the moment, who's to say? Because at some point he'll get back in the field, and then he's going to get all in his own head again, and who knows what will happen there. Okay, Joe Hanna, thoughts on the first week? Obviously, it's, I guess, better than expected, because expected would have been like 0-6. So,
yeah, very exciting stuff with the pitching staff. 5 good starts up until today. Finally had a clunker from Burke, but still, that was a much, much better first trip through the rotation than I would have expected. That was really a bizarre sequence there that resulted in them, having one of the longest streaks ever without allowing an earned run to begin a season. That was very cool. And I will say on the other side, Brooks Baldwin has been pretty solid so far. He, is still very young, and 2024 didn't really give us a whole lot to be happy with at the major league level. He did, all things considered, I'm happy that they promoted him. He had been cruising through the minor leagues, and it was definitely, given the state of the 2024 White Sox, it was the right call to call him up, even if, he wasn't really crushing it right out of the gates. But he's off to a good start, provided the only offense for them today with the home run. And he plays all over the field. So it's been a pleasant surprise having him, be a good producer throughout this first week of the season. Definitely wasn't expecting that from him. And as a slight bonus, 12th round pick, that makes me very happy, because that's where Sebi Zavala was also drafted. So had to slip that in there.
The streak continues. Sebi references in the podcast by Super Joseph Resis. You referred to that record that they tied or whatever, and something I found funny was those teams that the White Sox tied. I mean, they're going to end up being a good company, because they were, I think, 2-1 lousy team. 76 Brewers lousy team. I think there's a Giants team in there, a little more recent vintage team. I think they're all sort of bad. And then I don't know what the 1915 Boston team or whatever. It seems like most of those teams were actually pretty bad. And of course, despite the first place status, the White Sox are probably going to finish the season sort of bad. So odd that such a good stat correlates with these teams that ended up being really bad. Hannah Filippo, you have written on Southside Sox about this sort of run to start the season as well. So I assume that this staff, like most of us have acknowledged, is maybe the thing that's made us happiest about the start of the season. But anything specific within that, or I don't know, maybe even on the offensive side, that surprised you or pleased you or really disappointed you?
The offense is kind of giving me whiplash. There's moments where it just looks dead, and then there are moments where I'm like, oh, surprised they're not just surviving off the small ball. The Maton's 2 home runs, Benny's 2 homers this season so far. Vaughn's homer, I didn't think he'd had a home run for a while, but so this early in the season is surprising. But just seeing them actually lift the ball out of the park is kind of surprising to me, which is sad. But I thought Robert would be the only one who was doing that consistently enough.
Yeah, slugging wise, I think, just my little review before this podcast, because I do a lot of research. The middle of the pack slugging homers, I think they're up the top half of the league, which is bizarre. Yeah, I think we know now that the White Sox have to only play home series openers because they win those games and they romp in those games. If we could just somehow, if Jerry had enough sway in the league that he could just somehow figure it, that the White Sox could just get a few more than they really do, this is a team that really could be a first place team. Well, they are a first place team. What am I talking about? Is before we, I don't know, broaden this, or I don't know, somebody takes us in a different direction. Is this staff, obviously they're not going to sustain what they did the first 4 games. Is this staff going to be the strength of the team in the sense that the rotation was, let's just include Garrett Crochet, Eric Fetty in that as well, but their numbers would have stood up as the strongest of, let's say, defense, offense, bullpen last year. It seems maybe early on the discrepancy there might not be such a wide gap between maybe the offense and the pitching. I don't know. That's maybe a little too early to say. But are they going to be able to sustain this? And then when the injuries invariably happen, it does not really seem like, even though there are reinforcements coming, and this points to Malachi Hayes' great piece and his bold predictions as well on Southside Sox. Again, if you haven't checked out Hannah's piece, or Malachi's piece, please do that. You can pause this. We're not live. You can pause this, go read that, come back and listen to us. We're going to be around, and you're mostly going to be hearing me yakking about something. You don't want to do that. Go read those 2 smart pieces and then come back. But, of course, there's great reinforcements coming. Hagen Smith, Noah Schultz eventually, whether this year or not, fine. But there's not in the immediate minors, as always, ad infinitum, at AAA, there's not, maybe the reinforcements aren't maybe quite as dismal right off the bat as in the past, although you could probably debate that. So once there are any cracks showing, namely with injury, but of course with performance as well, is this rotation going to be able to sustain as the strength of the team even into midseason, much less all year the way it did last year?
Wait, hold on. I may need to clarify. If we're grouping the team into 3 categories, maybe starting pitching, relief pitching, and everyone else. In that case, if we are looking at it through those 3 broad categories, I don't think they will have any strengths.
This is the first place team you're talking about, Joe.
Yes, I do believe the starting pitching will be the best out of those 3 categories. But granted, there really isn't much to say that is positive about any of them. I could see a few of the starting pitchers having promising seasons. Don't really think we'll have a superstar year despite, the numbers from the first trip through the rotation. Really, yeah, there's certainly some potential there, but I would have to be very much on the optimistic side for me to, see the rotation as something that is, above league average. So yeah, I'm going to go with it's not really sustainable at this point.
Malachi, let me chuck this straight at you. I believe in your bold predictions. Again, pause, go read. I should pause, go read right now, but I can't pause. I'm talking right now. I think you had Davis Martin as the sort of staff MVP, pitching MVP on the team. I think your high side for him was maybe a 3 WAR. With that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but with that, does that necessarily mean he's going to be the clear standout? Do you see the staff generally being, though young arms, and throw in Martin Perez as well, as guys who are going to be, all positive WAR, all positive performers, and guys who are getting into that, 2-3 WAR category, or were you looking at more like he's the standout and the rest is going to just be a mess?
I'll put it this way. I am more confident that Davis Martin is going to be an above average pitcher than I do any of the other guys. And I also have confidence that at least one of those other guys, if you're picking between Sean Burke, Jonathan Cannon, Shane Smith, or even Some of the high minors depth like Nick Nastrini or
Sure.
Jairo Iriarte, who are likely to come up in the event of an injury. I would, maybe I'm being optimistic, but I would like to bet that one or maybe two of those guys will click enough that maybe they do hover around a league average or slightly better pitching staff, and we get a clear sense of who actually has a future on the team and who doesn't.
Yeah, you're getting a grouping of guys, which is, of course, what you always want to end up having at some point. You got to have some payoff to a rebuild, another rebuild, and another rebuild. To have this group of guys, and now you see who is going to distinguish themselves. And some guys are going to get hurt, some guys are going to flame out, some guys are going to go to the pen, and then maybe, hopefully, if you're lucky, 1, 2, 3 of them, become your 1, 2, 3 guys. So you see that as being conceivable in 2025.
I think there's a level of depth to the upper minors and to the youth of the rotation as far as long-term ceiling or players for whom there actually is the potential to anchor or be a significant contributor to a playoff staff. I think that's there in a way that it wasn't present in either 2020, 2021, or going even back to that first real attempt at bouncing back from 100 losses in 2015, 2016. So I also have more faith in Brian Bannister and what he's doing than more or less anybody that they have had in player development over the last 10, 15 years or so.
Yeah. And forget these talk about these guys being 1, 2, 3, because we don't need them to be 1, 2, 3. We need them to be 3, 4, 5 because we got 1, 2. Again, acknowledging your piece that as soon as this year we could have a couple guys getting, I'm sure very, very controlled, very modified starts if they're even starts. But of course, not that your 1, 2 need to be or should be southpaws, but hey, you got Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz coming. So these guys don't even have to be guys who are going to carry a staff. They just got to be guys who can legitimately say they're on a staff.
Yeah, I didn't even mention Hagen Smith there, who's likely to be a contributor at pretty much the moment he sets in the big league. So
let's swing past Sonny, optimistic, proud fan of a first place team, Brian O'Neill, and swing it over to Hannah again, because you've sort of drilled down into the rotation as well. Is what some of your feelings match up with what Malachi's saying? And do you see, same question, I suppose you see, whatever the order is, I think you were a Davis Martin fan as well, but you see generally the case where you see maybe another 1 to 2 arms distinguishing themselves enough to say, hey, I think we got our 3, 4, 5, heading into 2026.
I like who's coming up. I like Smith coming up, and I don't really have faith in Nastrini, but I like Smith coming up. I don't feel confident, though, that the 5 in place now will be able to have that sustained level of productivity throughout the year. And it's nothing wrong. It's not any diss to them, but if these are most of these guys' first full years of pitching, they're going to have some mental struggles at some point. And I like Brian Bannister and Ethan Katz. I don't trust them to be able to. I think there's just a learning curve that can't be beat this year, and it's inevitable with this pitching staff, unfortunately. But I do like what I see so far, but it doesn't mean that come August this might be very different.
If Malachi's tabbing, say, Davis Martin, because I think you're both in agreement that, let's say, he's going to be the guy on the staff, the guy who's going to be able to get the most starts, let's say, stay the healthiest, pitch the best. If his range is maybe 2.5, 3 WAR type of thing, are you seeing him more maybe as a just basically getting to league average, say like a 2 WAR guy? Or you think you think the best pitcher on the staff might be a little bit better than average?
I think hovering around, I wouldn't say much better, maybe slightly better than league average, but they're all young. So
all right. Tempered enthusiasm, yet still some optimism and enthusiasm. Okay, let's swing it to real enthusiasm, true enthusiasm. What this podcast is really all about. Brian, do you think? Again, original question, as obtuse as it was, had to do with the fact that obviously these first 5 starts aren't going to be sustained all year. Of course not. Sorry, I hope I'm not popping a bubble there. But I mean, again, can they keep it up close? And when the inevitable happens, that the injuries, and so forth. Do you have faith in the higher minors, or is that time when we call Hagen Smith early to say, hey, come up and rescue our number 5 slot in the rotation and give us a push?
Yeah, I mean, I think Malachi and Hannah and Joe said it really well. Like, we do have talent coming up. These guys aren't going to be world beaters. What I think is going to help, and I haven't, done a deep dive into the stats or even a shallow dive or even dipped my toe into a lot of them, but the just eye test for the first 6 games, the defense looks a lot better. People are not kicking the ball around, and that's going to help the pitchers out, however marginally it's going to do so. It just looks, I mean, for the most part, there's been flaws and everything, but it doesn't look like the last couple of years where you just have people who don't seem to know what they're doing at all. And I think that's going to help the pitchers at the margins, give them a little, not necessarily have a bunch of 4, 5, 6 out innings, which we've had a lot of over the last few years. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to come down to earth. We already saw that happen today a little bit. And yeah, I really like the people who are coming up from the minors. I mean, Smith and Schultz, I do think they're going to contribute a lot this year. But yeah, I mean, when you asked, earlier in the question, what is going to be the strength? I don't know, for you, like you said, we might not have an actual strength, but in terms of things that might be improved upon a little bit, just not looking like, my team at softball after 6 or 7 beers by the third inning, like just kind of chucking it around and not knowing what's going on. So,
whereas last year we would have absolutely preferred your softball team after 7 or 8, however many beers, playing on the diamond, because that, I mean, come on. That would have at least been fun. At least we said, well, okay, of course we're supposed to laugh at these guys. It's Brian's softball team.
Exactly.
And they're loaded. Yeah, and in case we need to clarify before break, it is the official position of both Sox Populi, the podcast, and Southside Sox, the writing entity and former podcast, that is just not advisable to take a deep dive into the stats at any time, even a shallow dip. With caution, make sure there is a lifeguard on duty when you do that. Dangerous. Malachi's already done it this year. Hannah's done it several times this year. Very dangerous. They are the worst for the wear already, and we're a week into the season. We're going to take a quick break. We might talk a little bit about the offense. We'll talk about something. We got to talk about a little bit. There's going to be a second half. That means we had to talk about something. So stick with us for a minute or two. Promise we'll be back talking about the first place White Sox. White Sox fans, my name is Brett Ballantini. I am hosting Sox Populi podcast. It's the mothership, 187. Unbelievable amount of podcasts devoted to a team whose window of contention started to slowly shut about the time these podcasts started. And then, oh, wow, recently, once we crossed 100, it just slammed shut. The window pane broke. But even that opening in the window pane wasn't enough for us to squeeze a few wins out. We're coming off of a 41-win season. Some of the most dour among us predict the White Sox will lose, again, about 120. I, of course, would never do that. I'm jacked about the 2-4 first place White Sox right now. We are not looking back, baby. We've been in first place all but one day this season. Oh, man, I can't wait for the next podcast. I want to end this podcast just so we can get to the next one and talk about how exciting it's going to be when the White Sox are 4-11 and still in first place. It's going to be phenomenal. We did address this a bit. I think perhaps I have with Joe and Hannah. Maybe not. I don't know. We get a lot of guests on these podcasts. A lot of different titles. A lot of different. It's hard for me to keep track. That said, I'm upset. So I'm particularly interested in knowing where the Malachi and Brian are on this. But of course, Joe and Hannah, this is a free forum, so jump on in. I don't understand how a team goes through an offseason the way the White Sox did, which is their usual offseason, which is basically plugging a couple holes that you sort of almost have to. By accidentally, they plug a couple, and it's usually 4A guys. And yes, maybe one of those guys will have an okay year, so you can flip them at the deadline, whatever. So in other words, in the offseason, they're not making a concerted effort to get better. Okay, and who knows what season they're going to do that. It's definitely not now. And yet there's a wave of talent, or there is talent in the minor leagues, guys like, say, Chase Mydroth, who seems like he should be on this team right now, the White Sox, not the Charlotte Knights team that he's on right now. Kyle Teal or Edgar Caro. Do we need the catchers we have right now? It just is odd to me that you're breaking camp literally with almost no rookies, and the rookies that they did break camp with and the pitching staff. I believe there were 0 rookies among the hitters and position players. Seems bizarre to me, frustrating to me. So I guess the question is, do you share that sentiment? And of course, you just got to nod your head in agreement because it's obviously the right position. But do you agree with that sentiment? And then I guess let's just try to like spin this positive. The White Sox in first place. Do the White Sox bring guys up, especially with guys really getting off to nice starts, small sample size in Charlotte, but they're proven, I don't know, Colson Montgomery isn't getting off to a hot start. He's not coming up anytime soon. There are plenty of other guys you think, hey, they might have pushed their window, up to get up to the majors sooner. So if the mistake was made breaking camp in March without any hitting rookies, can that be corrected, or will that be corrected anytime sooner? Are they just going to do a weird service time thing, or no, we want to see how Corey Lee plays out this season?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on there. I've talked in the Slack a little bit. I don't think it makes sense to of Jake Eater or who was it that was also designated for assignment.
Fletcher.
And Fletcher, excuse me, and Dominic Fletcher, who nothing exciting, probably almost certainly is not good, but to give up on maybe the 5 or 10% chance that they are actually able to make some adjustments and turn around their big league careers. Oscar Colas is another example right there. It's a tiny chance, but it's worth more than a couple months of Travis Jankowski on the roster. I'm not really sure what's going on there. And, the way the offense and the position player roster construction has been handled is one of the reasons why Bannister actually being somewhat successful at his job, I think, stands out, because Chris Getz is not giving us much to go on if you want to argue that he's any good or learning from previous mistakes.
This year's Kevin Pillar. Who will be this year's Kevin Pillar? Although Kevin Pillar got jerked around more than anyone I think this year has gotten jerked around so far. So, yeah, who's going to be this year's Kevin Pillar? Brian, thoughts on this? You can get angry. I mean, you can still be jacked about the first place team and be angry about aspects of it.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. Looking at Malachi's hat, it just reminds me of so many years with the Bears. We have a good defense, we have no offense. Now we're going to focus on the offense, but the defense is going to fall apart. And obviously there's smaller windows in fall for that to work than in baseball. And the strategy, I don't know, it just seems to get to all right, we're going to focus on pitching now, and maybe hitting will come along later, but we really want to make sure we get all this pitching solidified before we start to score runs. And that's not fun. That's not like a whole lot of fun. I don't know how it works as a strategy in baseball, but it just doesn't make any sense. It just does not make any sense to have, like Jankowski. There's just no reason for some of these guys to be on the roster and other people not. If we lose, it's like we said, if you lose 108 games and you would have lost 110 with rookies, who cares? The veteran presence that gives you one more win, which dubious propositions that may be, but assuming it's correct, doesn't make a difference. So I don't like it.
And I promise, Joe and Henny, you get to talk here soon, but Malachi, I got to throw this back to you. Okay, the one guy that they did designate as able to make this, and the guy they said was going to break camp is Colson Montgomery, the guy who hadn't shown anything. And you can make an argument for all the other guys, maybe other than my draw, hadn't maybe proven enough or played enough at AAA to really break camp with the team. Okay, I'll even grant that. But the notion that the one guy, that's the guy, and I understand there's political reasons that you may want to do that, especially because there seemed to be a pretty open path to the job, but to the shortstop job on the south side. But that's peculiar, too. If that's the guy you're going to throw, I understand, I guess, sort of why he does it, but it doesn't make you look good when the back gets cranky and, then the hole in the swing, resurfaces and so forth. I can see you are competing for the microphone a bit, but that's to be understood. That's understandable. Somebody is begging for a little bit of attention, but I mean, that's just even, I don't want to say it's necessarily insulting, but it's not the greatest look. When that's the one guy you're like, yeah, this guy's got the chance. We're always going to coronate him. Meanwhile, my draw or whatever else any of these guys do in Cactus League is not going to matter.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre because it's not like he lit the world on fire in AAA last year. If he had even an above average season on the whole, then it would make sense. Okay, we're just whoever Jake Amaya is warming the seat right now. If there's a probability of him just not figuring it out, though, which there was after a year like last year, a little bit bizarre to really open the door that wide, or at least publicly make such a big deal about it.
Yeah, he didn't have the momentum, let's say, other than the very, very end of the season and a little bit of, I guess the fall, whatever the fall league really matters. He didn't even have necessarily momentum of like a Tim Anderson, who was pushed pretty hard and sort of rushed up, but there was at least a little bit of one foot in front of the other momentum there. So, very interesting situation. Joe and Hannah, these bats, these position players, I think we did address it. The three of us have addressed this, but maybe putting focus on, do you think there's forget that the White Sox are now in a pennant race as a first place team. You got to defend your territory. Putting that to the side, if you can, it's hard to put that to the side, but in a normal circumstance, if we can call the White Sox normal, which we can't, do these guys, if they have a good few weeks, if they have a good April, are they up in the major leagues, and should they be up in the major leagues?
I really didn't think that there was any plausible rationale behind having some veteran presence.
You're not wrong.
A week ago, but now that the standings are how they are, I see the White Sox at the top of the AL Central, so now I see the vision. Really, I don't have that much to add on top of what was said. To be serious, I am surprised that they decided not to go with Mydroth on the opening day roster. I do think he will be in town fairly soon, and I hope that he is. Montgomery, ideally he would have been in Chicago, but he really hasn't earned it yet, so I'm fine with him not being there yet. Last year he had kind of a mediocre performance in Charlotte, and he's off to a pretty nightmarish start this year. I don't really have any comments on that one yet. But as far as, like, for example, though, it was, already touched upon. But, like Jankowski, I don't really get. Michael A. Taylor, I don't really get. Like, obviously those guys aren't going to be a part of the White Sox the next time they are good. It doesn't really seem like they're accomplishing much by bringing those guys on board, but we'll see what happens.
I don't profess to represent Travis Jankowski in a public forum, but I can guarantee you he did not sign with the White Sox so that he could be pinch hit late in the game by Corey Lee. Now, understanding that, it's the manager's call. But Hannah, what do you think about, I guess the question as it has evolved to if these guys beat the world, if the Charlotte Knights never lose again, do you get them up sooner or later? Is there a downside to getting these guys up maybe ahead of what you thought the schedule would be? I assume Chris Getz has enough organizational skills, which is a terrible presumption to make, and I want to take it back as I'm saying it, to have a flow chart saying, here's about when I would imagine Edgar Caro should be called up to the majors if all things go according to, what I think. I know I'm putting a lot on Chris Getz right there. Sorry, Chris, a lot of pressure to expect you have the chart, the dry erase board somewhere. Maybe you do. But is there any danger to getting these guys up, maybe a little sooner?
I don't think it hurts, honestly. That's also, if you have to be in the mentality of this is a growth year. This is a year where you're testing and you're seeing how these players can tread water. Now, I've not on any podcast, but I vehemently believe that the Sox cannot draft position players to save their life. They can't draft and develop a position player that is out of this world. Like Andrew Vaughn, Jake Berger, they're nowhere near the talents of like Rafi Devers, even though he's in a horrible slump right now. Rafi Devers or any other position player that's been drafted and developed by their own home team. So for any position players that the Sox have drafted, like Colson, I don't have much faith in. But when they poach position players from other teams, I'm all for it.
Yeah, right. They did the dirty work. Now, okay, now I'm getting angry at what you just mentioned, Hannah. And no offense, I'm not angry at you. Okay, last year Getz, I mean, he wants to erase this. Last year Getz went into the season, and he says a lot of things, I'm sure. Went into the season essentially. Now, if I'm remembering this wrong, tell me. Maybe I am. That the White Sox were going to compete. Now, he might have been saying that cheeky or rolling his eyes like, well, of course, like he thought he had to say that. But he said that. That's on record that he thought this team was going to compete. And of course, he whiffed terribly. This year, you can't even get him to say, probably smartly, you can't even get him to say that they're going to win more than they did in 2024. And yet we still have basically the same approach, which is these weirdo retreads, technically more talent to draw from than, say, a year ago. And yet it's not being drawn, breaking camp or talk of, hey, they're coming up anytime now. Once April 17th passes, wink, wink. Yes, we'll bring them up because then we'll have that extra year of control. Whatever it is, it's more aggravating this year than last because I don't know. He was at least trying to peddle something like, division's wide open, Central sucks, whatever. We're going to win it. He's not saying anything like that this year, and the approach, if anything, maybe is worse and more offensive in that there may be actual talent he could have broke camp with. That he did not do. Instead, we have Travis Jankowski and Michael A. Taylor and broken foot Rojas and whatever. So I don't know. Sorry, I just had to rant. I mean, you guys can jump in and calm me down or tell me I'm wrong, but it's aggravating. What are we doing? Okay, that concludes podcast 187. We've said everything we need to say, and we'll be back when the 4-11 White Sox are in first place next podcast. Let's shift it to, what do we need to shift it to? Well, okay, let's just look at April. The White Sox play about 6 weeks of cold, so the weather's not going to be their friend. I don't know what their strength of schedule is. It's definitely going to get harder than the Angels and the Twins. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a math guy, but something tells me that represents an easier portion of the schedule. So that said, what's going to happen from here? Brian, I know your answer is this team remains in first place. But, let's just look ahead to, say, the next week when, like, a real team shows up to play the White Sox. What's going to happen? I mean, as it is, we're at a 54-win pace. I know we can't extrapolate that, small sample size, whatever. But, hey, it's what we have to go on. What is going to happen? Is this team going to bristle up, or are we going to see 2024 revisited?
It's going to be a lot closer to 2024. I mean, you got the Guardians coming in, you got the Red Sox, and then a visit from Sacramento. Still, it's first time I've been able to say that.
Sure.
There's just, you look through it and, going 1-2, maybe stealing a series here and there is going to be the most we can hope for from April. Not getting swept in every series. Like, Hannah mentioned it at the top where she said there's something like, there's all this whiplash in watching the offense. And it's true, there's been a couple exciting things, but there's been, back in the math envelope, 5 good innings of offense, maybe 6. And then just other than that, there's been nothing. There's been a string of 1, 2, 3 innings, maybe a walk here and there. In theory, maybe they can spread that out a little bit, but this is a team that can have another 10, 15 game losing streak. Mm-hmm. And we can still say the pitching's been great, but until we start, maybe bring some of these bats up, we're going to have feast and famine, but famine is going to be far more prevalent across the land than buffet.
Okay, I'm desperately searching through my notes from just a year ago to just provide a little perspective. I don't think this is the final total series record, but the last one I see here, just for perspective, 2024, 9 wins in series, 41 losses, 2 ties. So, listen, 2025 White Sox, you have got to step up. You're 0-2 so far. What do the other 3 of you see as being, I don't know, the immediate fortunes of this team? 2-4, 2 real powerful wins, 4 very pretty much generally out of it losses. At least a couple of those were easy losses. What's going to happen when real teams come to play the White Sox?
I think it's only at some point, like Brian said, there is going to be a 10 or 15 game losing streak. They just can't. I think they have a chance to win maybe one of the series next month. Probably Cleveland, honestly, or Minnesota again, if they're able to actually see them well. But the second that they start dropping or getting swept by multiple teams, it's done. Like the morale will be tanked at that point. It will be very hard to recover. And not that they can't pull themselves out of it, but I mean, they've already gotten reminded of last year enough. The more and more they keep getting reminded, the less and less I believe in them being able to get their morale back up.
Yeah, and that's interesting because as much as a year ago we were like we all knew. Hannah, you weren't even here, but we know you were voting with us that Pedro Grifol was a clown of a manager. So it wasn't like, oh, this is going to be how they're going to handle diversity. But with a new manager in Will Venable, now you get that adversity. He's probably already got little doses of it, but when you get that real adversity, that's really going to be the test. It's easy to be hyped. It's easy to do that thing where you get in the shopping cart and everybody hits you with the beer after your first win and all that. I mean, those are the easy times. I remember seeing that happen to Pedro. So how are you going to get out of it? How are you going to behave even differently than Grady Sizemore? How are you going to distinguish yourself when this team is really taking some hits, whether it's a 10 or 15 game losing streak or just consistent series losses? This is a first place team that's lost 2 series. So again, Joe, Malachi, how do you see this immediate future now that we've got those easy games out of the way? There's some tougher competition or as tough or tougher competition coming to play, and the White Sox have to try to win some.
Yeah, it'll probably get pretty ugly. The White Sox will be very far out of first place by the time we get to the end of April. It's not going to be fun, but what I think could be a major improvement from last year, just by default, is that they had 3 separate losing streaks of 10 or more games, one of which was 21 games.
Franchise record breaking.
Yeah. Even given that, they won just about 25% of their games last year, even given that they only won that many games, it is very surprising that they had that many double-digit losing streaks mixed in there. I mean, that is very unlikely to happen again. They might have, I'll predict they'll only have 1 double-digit losing streak this year, and it'll be like 10 or 11.
Which had been the previous record in every other year. The White Sox beat that record by 2 streaks last year.
Yes, they'll finally run into some a pretty long streak of games as early as April, where we'll be like, this is more like what I expected.
Malachi, tell me I'm wrong. Are we ready for a rough stretch?
I don't know. Probably. I mean, April and September are both pretty erratic and chaotic and a little bit more random than most of the summer months. So it's hard to say like what specifically it's going to look like. I'm kind of looking at this team a little similarly as the 2018 White Sox, who actually were on, I want to say like, I just looked it up, they were on something like 112, 113 loss pace at the end of April going into May. After a tough April, they had a stretch where they lost like 13 or 14, something like that. It was the first full season in the majors for Yoel Moncada, Lucas Giolito, Ronaldo Lopez. Tim Anderson had already been up for a year, and there were spates later in the season where they managed to put together and they actually won a few series or won 2, 3, 4 in a row. But so that's the arc I would hope to follow, but I'm thinking something similarly as far as the end of April goes. Maybe we're looking at maybe 110 loss pace, something like that.
Okay. All right. Challenge question to wind this up. And it could go either way because there might be some positive answers and some negative answers. I just looked it up because I'm constantly researching despite all of the glib hosting I do. Last year, the White Sox had wins of 12-2 and 11-3. Those are the only things close to a blowout that offense provided. That almost record-breaking hideous offense. Only one major league team, two major league teams in history, not Federal League, not Negro League. I know they're major leagues, but American League or National League team in history had a collective WAR worse than the White Sox offense last year. Already this year, we've had wins by 7 runs and 9 runs. Is there something different about this offense that will help what Malachi just said, maybe 110 loss season, which would represent an improvement of more than 10 wins, or maybe even something better than that? Can this offense creep the White Sox closer to just 100 losses this year? Are we going to get something much closer to a 2018 season where there's this a little bit of youth movement, some sort of resurgence? Maybe it's Will Venable who's like, oh, listen, I'm getting my feet under me. Can this offense specifically, now that we know the pitching might be all right, can this offense specifically, because it's shown, at least in home series openers, they can explode, can that alone provide something that evens out the offensive performance to a degree, and maybe prevent, say, the long streaks and keep this team closer to 100 losses than 120 losses?
Possibly. I think
Good hedge, Joe.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that was a overly quick answer. I'll say yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It depends more on, like, okay, Andrew Benintendi really struggled at the beginning of last year, picked it up down the stretch, and he's been playing well so far this year. If he can keep hitting, and they continue to get some unexpected production from Nick Maton, Brooks Baldwin, who I would not have expected much of anything from them offensively this year. And they've had a good first week. If they can plug the gaps sort of in that lineup to where they aren't just like black holes out there where there are almost free outs, then that could make a big difference. I mean, a lot of times it's about patching up the gaps as opposed to strengthening the strengths. So and last year they certainly had all kinds of gaps throughout the lineup. So it comes down to, I think, unexpected production from guys like that.
For getting contributions from someone named Nick Maton, you would have been forgiven if you didn't know there was a player in the major leagues named Nick Maton, much less playing for the White Sox. So yes, if we get contributions for guys like that, this goes to the Malachi point that I love to always play up. Even when Malachi's not with us on the podcast, I say, hey, this guy Malachi says this thing about, like, you just got to find a couple of these, hidden gems, these 4A guys who decide they want to still have a career or whatever, and that can make a big difference between, 120 loss seasons, 110 loss seasons, 100 loss seasons. Okay, the other three of you, specifically, can this offense, because it has actually shown some flex in just 6 games, they've managed to run up as many routes as all last year. Again, really low bar there, but I mean, still, it happened. Could that be a difference?
It happened, but also, offense has been going crazy around the league the first week too. You have to take that into account.
Okay.
I'm looking at this roster. If Colson Montgomery or Edgar Caro or Kyle Teal catches fire and then is an instant impact big leaguer, then maybe we're looking at a situation where there's a little hidden thump there. But otherwise, I just don't see enough there for even a realistic best case scenario to do much more than float them to the dead cat bounce they'll get from Will Venable and from a general little breath of fresh air.
I don't want to steal Brian or Hannah's thunder here. I'm just looking at the dismal, and again, these are traditional statistics. I shouldn't even speak the words batting average, but I mean, you've got a leadoff hitter in Nick Maton who's 154, Luis Roberts at 190, Vargas 190. These aren't good numbers. Import Travis Jankowski. Okay, I guess he should have been pitch hit for by Corey Lee because he's hitting 182. Anyhow, I know traditional stats, small sample size. So I'll just shut up and hand it over to the smarter people. Brian and Hannah, can the offense provide just enough to make this team better? You've both predicted the team will be better. Pretty much everyone has. Only one person on our staff predicted the team would be worse. I predicted they'd be a game better. So that still qualifies as being better. Both of you did pick them to be significantly better than last year. can the offense play a role in that? Or will the offense play a role in that? No Joe Hedges.
Yeah, I mean, last year they averaged looking up 3 runs a game. This year it's almost 4, and this is a big enough sample size that kind of discrepancy is going to carry us through.
4 with the check of
4.
Malachi saying it's been a crazy atmosphere for the first week, which is great cold water to pour on this question, and it's instructive because lest we get carried away with the Sox have 8 home runs or 10 home runs. Yeah, okay, well, they're still not leading the league. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean,
the Yankees are doing that in 4 innings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Malachi's right. Malachi's right. There's enough potential black holes. I love what Joe was saying that, there's a chance that, we're not necessarily strengthening our strengths, but we might be, limiting our weaknesses. And if enough things click, then yeah, but there are so many potential black holes here. There are so many things where you can just say, if this person reverts even a little bit to their mean, then we have that. All right, well, there's no reason to watch after our 4th hitter comes up. We just might as well just turn the lineup over again. So, I mean, yeah, if enough things click a little bit, then yeah, closer to 110 losses, but it's not going to be something where we're like, this was a huge difference this year. We really took a big step forward.
At current pace, 110 losses would keep the White Sox in the division race until late September. So even that is going to work. We can work with that, White Sox. We can work with that. Okay, Hannah, you get final word here, and you've expressed, I guess, a little bit of realism / skepticism on what the upside of this team is. Offensively, specifically offensively, can this team sustain? Can this team break streaks? Can this team flex every home opener and put up 10 runs?
They can't flex, but they can raise their floor significantly. But it's not hard. It's not hard to raise their floor at this point. But they can raise their floor. I mean, they have so much depth in their lineup. Looking at AAA and AA, I mean, Tauchman's not even back yet. He's swinging the bat. Got Tim Elko, who's ready to come up. There's a lot of people that are. I mean, if the lineup's not cutting it, somebody can be swapped out easily at this point, and the floor will still be better than it was before.
Yeah.
So as long as not making poor defensive plays and then at least putting the bat on the ball, I think that you could get within 100 to 110 losses. I'm not going to say they're not going to break 100 losses, but they will get below 110, I think.
All right. Despite the giddiness of first place, we have not all lost our minds thinking this team could possibly just lose in double digits this year. Chris Getz seems to have a philosophy that, as I think Hannah just mentioned, swapping out easily, that seems to be like his number one priority. And I guess maybe you could just play around with your major league team that way when apparently he thinks I guess there's no pressure. Is he going to get fired? No. There's no pressure to win. So I guess you can do this thing where it's like, oh, well, Travis Jankowski's not doing well. Okay. Here comes Tauchman or, whoever it is. Let's hope that raises the floor a little bit. But again, when the floor is sub-basement level and flooding and cracked and broken and moldy and will kill you if you spend much time in it, it's the point of even talking about a floor. But that's what we're supposed to do with Chris Getz. And even this year, he will not say this team will be significantly raised from that floor of 2024. Oh, I find that delightful because he's usually a little chippier than that. I guess 2024 and a modern record of losses will humble a guy and also make him wake up and say, I still have a job? All right, well, I guess I'll show up. I still have a parking space? Wow, this really is a lifetime appointment. Okay. Way to go, White Sox. Way to go, Jerry Ransford. You made me hate the team I've always loved. Malachi Hayes, welcome back. Thank you for being here with us, both writing at Southside Sox and opining smartly on the podcast and representing various teams. Not the Sky today, but the Bears. Okay, up and coming. Better future than the White Sox, I guess. Immediate future. Brian O'Neill with us from the northern hinterlands, as I believe Hannah Filippo is also hailing from. So you guys meet afterward, share notes on the podcast, talk about goods, bads, and why is that guy still hosting. And Super Joseph Resis off on the West Coast, enjoying life. soon to be married. Sorry, ladies. He's soon to be taken. All right. Joe, Malachi, Brian, Hannah, thanks for doing this. We're trying to pace these out maybe every week, 10 days. We'll see if these White Sox forces to call emergency badness podcasts, which soon will just give way to just never having them in the second half of the season, as happened last year. But right now, we're still trying to be bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. After all, this is a first place 2-4 Chicago White Sox team. So come join us in another week or 10 days or 3 days or whenever it's going to be when we discuss more exciting developments of the first place White Sox as they fall to 4-12 or whatever it's going to be. But thanks everybody for listening, reading, watching, all that stuff, and my wonderful guests for all your great insight. Let's do it again real soon.